The late afternoon sun spilled through the towering windows of the high-rise penthouse, but Nathan Carter hardly noticed. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the sprawling skyline of Manhattan, though his mind was miles away. Something had shifted inside him, something unfamiliar and disarming. And it had a name. Isla Dot. It had been 3 weeks since their marriage on paper, at least. What was supposed to be a strategic move, a contract born out of convenience and optics, had morphed into something far more dangerous. Emotional. And Nathan Carter didn't do emotions. Not in business, not in life, not ever. But Isla had a way of disturbing the still waters he'd spent years keeping. Calm Nathan clenched his jaw and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, as if saying it aloud would push the unease away. "It's just a contract, just a deal, nothing more." But the voice inside him didn't echo the same certainty it once had. Across the room, the echo of footsteps approached, heavy, confident. Grant, Nathan's closest advisor and longtime friend, entered the living room with a glass of scotch in one hand and a raised brow. "You're slipping," Grant said plainly, as he settled into the leather chair facing Nathan. "And I'm not talking about in business. You've never been sharper there." Nathan's silence gave him away. "She's getting to you, isn't she?" Nathan turned slightly, his arms folded, trying to look indifferent. "She's not getting to me," Grant smirked. "You're not sleeping. You're not focusing. You haven't returned my last 3 calls. Don't insult me by pretending this has nothing to do with Isla." The silence lingered like smoke between them. Nathan wasn't sure how to respond. How could he? He didn't even fully understand what was happening inside him. All he knew was that when Isla walked into a room, the temperature shifted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even try to be noticed. And yet, she dominated every space she entered. "I underestimated her," Nathan said finally. "That's an understatement," Grant replied. "You thought she'd be like the others. Pretty, compliant, temporary. But Isla, she's different." Nathan turned to the glass window again. He hated this. He hated feeling unbalanced, vulnerable. She wasn't just different. She was unpredictable. She challenged his authority without ever raising a finger. She questioned his choices without saying a word. And somehow, she did all of this while maintaining a grace that made him question everything he thought he wanted in a woman. "You know what I think?" Grant continued, swirling his drink lazily. "She's the first person you've met who doesn't need anything from you. Not your money, not your power, not your protection. She doesn't flinch in your presence. She sees through the facade, and it terrifies you." "I'm not terrified," Nathan replied sharply, the words laced with pride. Grant chuckled. "No? Then why haven't you kicked her out yet?" Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't, because Grant was right. Any other woman would have been gone by now. The moment they crossed a line or made things personal, Nathan would have had his legal team draft the exit. Clean, efficient. Cold but not with Isla Dot. There was something magnetic in her defiance, something powerful in her silence. She never shouted. She never begged. She simply existed with an intensity that made Nathan feel exposed. That morning, he'd passed by her in the hallway. She was barefoot, wearing a soft white robe, holding a mug of tea as if it were a sword. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word, but her presence composed, confident, unshaken had left him paralyzed. She hadn't even tried, and that's what scared him most. Nathan finally sank into the leather sofa across from Grant. He looked exhausted, drained in a way that no merger or boardroom battle had ever left him. "She's not playing by the rules," Nathan said. "And I don't even know if she has a game plan." Grant nodded. "That's because this isn't a game for her. Not the kind you're used to, anyway. The question is, why are you so invested? What does it matter?" Nathan didn't answer. He couldn't admit it, not even to himself that. Deep beneath the layers of pride, strategy, and control, something was happening that he couldn't define. Isla had tapped into something raw, human. She was unraveling him in the most subtle, sophisticated way imaginable. It wasn't about desire. It wasn't even about respect. It was about power and the terrifying realization that for the first time in his life, he might not be the one holding it. He thought back to the night they signed the papers. Her hand had been steady, her signature elegant and fluid. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no fear, only clarity. As if she knew exactly what she was walking into. And now Nathan was starting to suspect that Isla had understood the terrain far better than he ever had. I married her for optics, he muttered, mostly to himself. A 6-month agreement. Keep the press satisfied. Show the world stability. Nothing more. But you're not stable, Grant said, finishing his drink. You're unraveling. Because for the first time, someone is in your house, in your space, in your mind, and you didn't invite her in that deep. Nathan stood again, restless. The walls felt closer somehow. The city outside looked distant, meaningless. She has this way of looking at me, like she already knows what I'm going to say. Like she's always 2 steps ahead. It's infuriating. It's not infuriating, Grant corrected. It's threatening. You're not used to being the one on defense. Nathan nodded slowly. That was the truth he didn't want to face. Isla wasn't just challenging his emotions. She was challenging his identity. Every moment with her was a mirror, forcing him to confront the man he had become, and question whether he liked what he saw. Just keep reminding yourself it's a contract, Grant said finally, rising to leave. If you forget that, you lose. But Nathan remained still as Grant walked out, the echo of his words lingering. A contract. That's what he told himself. That's what he kept saying, over and over, like a mantra, like a lifeline. But every time he looked at Isla, every time she walked past him like a ghost he couldn't grasp, every time she spoke with that calm, measured tone, he felt the lines of that contract blurring. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Carter didn't know what the hell he was doing. The tension in the penthouse was heavier than the humid city air that seeped through the barely cracked window. Nathan Carter sat rigidly in his chair, eyes locked on the swirling amber liquid in his glass. The weight of unspoken words pressed on him like an invisible shroud. Every second stretched longer than the last as he awaited the inevitable. A confrontation, a breakthrough, or maybe just a confession. A quiet, deliberate knock at the door startled him from his spiral. He did not turn immediately. Instead, his voice cracked through the silence. Come in. The door creaked open, and there she was. Isla stood framed by the dim hallway light, serene, yet somehow carrying a storm in her eyes. Her presence was calm but potent, as if she held something inside that could topple mountains if unleashed. Nathan's heart betrayed him for a moment, fluttering wildly before he forced it back into place. He leaned back, his chair creaking beneath him, arms crossed like a shield. We need to talk, Isla said, her voice smooth but resolute. There was no hesitation, no pleading, just a firm statement that demanded attention. Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. About what? She stepped inside fully, closing the door softly behind her. The room suddenly felt smaller, charged. Their usual battle of silence gave way to raw vulnerability. What are we doing here, Nathan? Her gaze was piercing, searching for the truth beneath the facade. The question hit him harder than he expected. He swallowed, the dry lump in his throat making words difficult. We're married, he answered cautiously, but it's a contract. A strategic alliance. That's all. Isla's eyes softened, but there was no trace of mockery or contempt, only a profound sadness. Do you believe that, really? Nathan hesitated, weighing the honesty against his pride. I have to. Otherwise, this whole arrangement collapses. She moved toward the window, pulling aside the sheer curtain to reveal the sprawling city lights. The neon glow reflected off her skin, giving her an ethereal look that belied the gravity of her words. You think I've been pretending? Playing a role to survive? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. No, Nathan said, stepping closer, his voice dropping. But I thought we both understood the game. This marriage was a temporary truce, a shield against the world. Not whatever this is. She shook her head, a shadow flickering across her face. I never played, Nathan. This, what's between us, is real. More real than anything else I've ever experienced. Nathan's chest tightened. He tried to push down the stirrings of something unfamiliar, an emotion he refused to name. Why? Why go through this charade? What do you want from me? Isla met his gaze with unwavering intensity. There are reasons you don't know. Things I've carried alone for too long. He swallowed again, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. I don't understand? You will, she replied softly. But not now. Not tonight. Right now, I need you to listen. Nathan's defenses flickered. For all his years of experience, nothing had prepared him for this moment of raw honesty. I'm listening. Isla took a breath, steadying herself. This isn't just about power or revenge. Not entirely, anyway. It's about pain, loss, and a desperate hope for justice. Nathan looked away, guilt prickling at the edges of his mind. What are you talking about? You left a trail of destruction behind you, she said quietly. A trail I had to follow. And I'm not the only one hurting. His pulse quickened. I don't know what you expect me to say. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Not yet. I'm asking for honesty. From you. From me. From us. The words felt like a lifeline. Nathan's carefully constructed walls trembled as he faced the woman, not as an adversary, but as a mirror reflecting his own brokenness. Maybe, he said slowly, maybe it's time we stop pretending. Isla nodded, a fragile smile touching her lips. Maybe. Nathan closed the distance between them, the cold space shrinking with every step. Tell me everything, he urged. I want to understand. For a moment, Isla hesitated. Then the mask slipped just a fraction, and for the first time, Nathan glimpsed the woman behind the resolve. Okay, she said, voice thick with emotion. But it's not an easy story. Nathan braced himself. I'm ready. Isla looked out at the city, gathering her thoughts like threads, weaving a tapestry of truth. My father was a man who believed in hard work and honesty, she began. He built his company from nothing, fought every day to protect it from people like you, people who cared only about profit. Nathan's stomach tightened. He hated where this was going, but knew he had to listen. He trusted me, Isla continued. And when you took his company, you didn't just ruin a business. You destroyed a family. You broke a man. Her voice cracked. Nathan took a step back, guilt washing over him like cold water. He couldn't take it, she said softly. The pressure, the humiliation, it was too much. He ended his own life. Nathan closed his eyes, the memory stabbing deep into his conscience. I didn't know, he whispered. Maybe, Isla said, turning to face him again. But you should have. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Nathan's mind raced with regret and the realization of the pain he had caused. This why you agreed to marry me? He asked quietly. Isla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Partly. But this marriage isn't just about revenge. It's about making you see what your actions cost. Nathan's voice trembled. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Intentions don't erase consequences. Isla said firmly. Nathan looked at her, his defenses finally crumbling. I don't know if I can fix this. You can't, Isla said. Not with words alone. But maybe, with time, with honesty, with real change. He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. We both have to decide what comes next, Isla said, stepping closer, her voice softening. Because whatever this is between us, it's no longer just a contract. Nathan reached out, hesitating before placing his hand gently over hers. The gesture was small, but significant, a silent agreement to face the unknown together. As the city lights shimmered below, two wounded souls began to untangle their past and dare to imagine a future. The days following their first honest conversation felt almost surreal to Nathan Carter. For the first time in years, the man who thrived on control and certainty found himself adrift in a sea of unsettled thoughts and unfamiliar emotions. Isla's quiet strength, her unwavering calm, and the subtle way she commanded attention without raising her voice, unsettled him profoundly. Nathan had always believed he was the master of his domain. He built his empire from the ground up, with cold calculation, ruthless ambition, and a mind that never stopped strategizing. But with Isla, none of that seemed to matter. She moved through his world as if on a chessboard, always several moves ahead, and yet, without ever seeming to play the same game he thought he was playing. He began noticing the smallest things. The tilt of her head when she listened, the way her eyes held 1,000 unspoken questions, the way she used silence as a weapon far more potent than any argument. Isla didn't need to shout or storm the room. She simply existed, and that presence alone unsettled Nathan to his core. In an effort to reclaim the upper hand, Nathan resorted to tactics he thought would bring clarity. He hired private investigators, instructing them to uncover anything about Isla's past that might give him leverage, any secrets that could reveal vulnerability or weaknesses. He needed to understand her, to anticipate her moves, to predict her next step in the silent war that was now their daily reality. But the investigators returned empty-handed. Isla's past was a sealed vault. No missteps, no skeletons, no cracks for Nathan to pry open. Every attempt to unearth something was met with silence or dead ends. It was as if Isla had deliberately erased the traces of her history, protecting not only herself, but her very soul. Meanwhile, back in their shared home, Isla maintained a steady, unwavering presence. Nathan often caught her watching him from across the room, calm, composed, eyes flickering with a mixture of assessment and something else he couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, nor was it disdain. It was understanding, a knowing. That unnerved him. She anticipated his moods and reactions before he even realized what he was feeling. She preempted his arguments with quiet counterpoints. She navigated conversations with a precision and grace that left Nathan scrambling to keep up. One particular evening stood out in Nathan's memory. He had returned home late, exhausted and frustrated from a day filled with back-to-back meetings, crushing deadlines, and unexpected setbacks at work. He expected at least a hint of sympathy, or perhaps tension, some acknowledgement of the strain in their marriage. Instead, Isla was seated in the living room, serene and unruffled, reading a book with an air of tranquil detachment. The soft glow of the lamp cast gentle shadows over her face, making her look almost ethereal. Their eyes met briefly, and Nathan felt an acute awareness of her control, not through force or words, but simply through presence. It was a silent assertion of power, a reminder that she was the one steering this ship, not him. "How do you do it?" Nathan finally asked, voice low and hoarse from the day's weariness. "How do you stay so calm, so untouchable?" Isla closed her book with a soft thud and met his gaze steadily. "Because I don't waste energy fighting battles I can't win," she replied simply. Nathan shook his head, disbelief flashing in his eyes. This isn't a game to me. Maybe not, she said softly. But it is to me. And I've been playing longer than you realize. Her words stung, piercing through his carefully built armor. She was right. She was playing a game. Nathan had only just begun to comprehend. Days turned into weeks, and Nathan felt his usual certainty erode like sand slipping through fingers. Projects he had once managed with effortless confidence began to falter inexplicably. Decisions that used to be crystal clear became clouded and fraught with doubt. His carefully constructed image of dominance was cracking under the pressure of Isla's silent influence. What unsettled Nathan most wasn't just her strategic withdrawals or the cold shoulder she occasionally gave him. It was the way she wielded silence as a weapon. When Isla stopped speaking, it was not emptiness, but a charged void filled with meaning. Every ignored question, every withheld glance, every subtle refusal to engage chipped away at Nathan's emotional armor. He found himself desperate for any sign of connection, for a single moment that told him he still mattered. Yet Isla maintained her distance with calculated precision, forcing Nathan to confront his own vulnerability and insecurity, emotions he was ill-equipped to handle. Their relationship evolved into a delicate, high-stakes chess match. Each interaction became a move, each word or silence a calculated step in a complex dance of power. Nathan was no stranger to competition, but this game was unlike any he had played before. It was not about money, contracts, or business deals. It was about the fragile landscape of human emotions, about pride, pain, regret, and the desperate need for control. Nathan began to see that Isla's strength was rooted in a profound self-possession. She did not need his money, his status, or his validation. She stood on her own ground, unshaken by his power or his threats. This realization was both terrifying and magnetic. For the first time, Nathan saw Isla not as a pawn or an adversary, but as an equal, perhaps the only person capable of breaking through the walls he had built around himself. One night, lying awake in the darkness, Nathan admitted a truth he had long buried. Isla had become the center of his world, whether he liked it or not, and that terrified him more than anything else. He thought back to moments when she had subtly undermined his confidence, a cold silence at a critical moment, a knowing glance that left him exposed, a refusal to engage. In his usual power plays, she wasn't just playing the game. She was rewriting the rules. Nathan knew that if he was going to survive, not just in business, but in this new, unpredictable terrain of his marriage, he would have to adapt, to understand her on a deeper level, to relinquish some control, and accept that the power between them was shifting. It was a daunting prospect. For a man who had built his life on certainty, power, and dominance, the emotional vulnerability Isla demanded was unfamiliar territory. Yet, in the depths of his heart, Nathan realized that this challenge was also an opportunity, a chance to become a different man, one capable of humility, empathy, and perhaps even love. But before that could happen, he had to confront the truth Isla held up to him every day, that he was no longer in control. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly how it needed to be. The penthouse was unusually silent that evening, the kind of silence that feels charged, thick with anticipation and unspoken truths. Nathan Carter stood by the large glass window, looking out at the city lights twinkling beneath the night sky. His mind was restless, a storm he could no longer control brewing inside him. Isla entered quietly, closing the door behind her with a soft click that echoed louder than expected. Her face was calm, almost serene, but Nathan could see the fire burning behind her eyes, a fire that had been smoldering for years. Without a word, she walked toward him, stopping just inches away. The air between them crackled with tension. "Nathan," she said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "There's something I've been holding inside, something you need to hear. No more games, no more secrets." Nathan's heart pounded. He nodded slowly, bracing himself for whatever was coming. Isla took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Years ago, you made a decision, a business decision. It didn't just affect companies or markets. It destroyed my family." Nathan's eyes searched hers, confused and suddenly vulnerable. "I don't understand." Isla's voice grew firmer. "You ruined my father's company. You pushed him into bankruptcy. You crushed everything he built." Nathan's breath hitched. The words sank deep, a wound reopening after years of being ignored. "My father," Isla continued, "was a man of honor and hard work. He believed in integrity and the value of community. But when your company took over his, when you gutted it for profit and left nothing but debts and broken promises, he lost everything." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. "He couldn't bear it," Isla said quietly. The shame, the humiliation, the weight of failure crushed him. He took his own life. Nathan staggered, back, his hand instinctively reaching for the nearest surface for support. "I never knew," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know it went that far. I never wanted. I never meant to hurt anyone like that." Isla's gaze hardened. "Intentions don't matter, Nathan. The destruction was real. The pain was real. And it's been with me every day since." The room felt smaller, suffocating, as Nathan grappled with the crushing reality. He had spent years chasing success, blinded by ambition, oblivious to the collateral damage. "You didn't just marry me for convenience," Isla said softly, stepping closer. "You didn't just sign a contract. You married a woman who has been living with the aftermath of your actions." Nathan's voice was barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because," Isla said, her tone heavy, "I needed you to understand what it meant. Not just for me, but for the person you are." He swallowed hard, pain and guilt intertwining inside him. "I wish I could change it." "You can't," she replied. "No amount of wishing will bring back what was lost. But maybe, just maybe, you can learn to live with the consequences. And maybe you can learn to be better." Nathan looked at her, searching her face for a hint of forgiveness, a crack in the armor she wore so fiercely. But all he saw was strength, a strength born from pain and determination. "I was never a pawn in this," Isla said, her voice gaining power. "I was a player. And this marriage? It's not just a contract. It's a reckoning." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "A reckoning?" "Yes," Isla said, stepping back with quiet conviction. "You've been playing a game for years, thinking you controlled everything. But I'm here to change the rules." He looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. This was no longer just a business arrangement or a personal vendetta. It was a battle for truth, for justice, for something deeper than either of them had expected. Nathan's voice was soft, almost pleading. "What do you want from me?" "More than apologies," Isla said. "I want honesty. I want you to face the man you've become. I want you to understand the pain you caused, not just to me, but to everyone who believed in you." Her words cut through his defenses like a knife. The man who had spent years building walls around his emotions now stood exposed. Shoulders slumped. "I don't know if I'm worthy." "You're not," Isla admitted. "Not yet. But that doesn't mean you can't be." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the echoes of past mistakes and the possibility of redemption. Nathan looked back at Isla, his eyes searching for a way forward. "Where do we go from here?" Isla took a step closer, her gaze softening. "We start by being honest, with each other and with ourselves. No more contracts, No more games. Just truth. Nathan nodded slowly, feeling the first flicker of hope amid the darkness. For the first time, he said quietly, I want to believe that. Isla reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. As the city lights sparkled outside, two souls once broken by pain began the slow, painful process of healing. Together. The days following Isla's revelation were enveloped in a silence so profound it felt as though the very walls of the penthouse absorbed every breath, every footstep, leaving an echoing void in its place. Nathan Carter, once a man who wielded influence with ease and commanded respect in every boardroom and social gathering, found himself confined to a world where he was rendered invisible by the woman he was supposed to call his wife. Isla's silence was not a mere absence of words. It was a calculated and devastating punishment, slow, relentless, and utterly disarming. It was as if she had withdrawn her very essence from their shared life, communicating her rejection not with anger or accusation, but with cold, deliberate omission. At first, Nathan attempted to breach the wall of silence. He tried everything, whispered apologies in quiet corners, tentative conversations that ended in hollow replies, and gestures meant to convey remorse. But Isla met every effort with the same unyielding calm, a gaze that acknowledged his existence. For a fleeting moment, then swiftly turned away, as if to say, you are here, but you are not welcome. The staff in the penthouse, caught between two worlds, became the reluctant intermediaries of this new reality. Isla spoke to them, issuing instructions that bypassed Nathan completely, as though he were a ghost haunting a home that no longer belonged to him. They answered her commands with practiced neutrality, but could not hide the tension that settled in the air. Nathan's world began to shrink. The vibrant, lively home they had once shared now felt hollow and cold. Rooms that had echoed with laughter and conversation were now filled with oppressive silence. Meals were eaten without exchange, side by side, but emotionally distant. The bed they once shared, a symbol of unity and intimacy, became a cold expanse, a reminder of the growing chasm between them. For Nathan, the silence was a punishment, more cruel than any shouted argument or bitter confrontation. It forced him into solitude in the midst of proximity, compelling him to face the vast emptiness that his actions had wrought. His pride, once a shield behind which he hid, now felt like a burden that weighed him down. He was stripped of all pretense, laid bare before a truth he had long avoided. Isla, for her part, carried herself with a fierce, unwavering resolve. Her silence was her armor and her weapon, a way to reclaim power in a world that had once been taken from her. By rendering Nathan invisible, she reversed their roles. The man who had so often wielded control was now disarmed, forced to reckon with the consequences of his choices. As days turned into weeks, Nathan's attempts to reconnect grew increasingly desperate. He left notes, brief, sincere apologies, in places she might find them. He sent flowers, small tokens meant to bridge the gulf between them. He even tried to speak through mutual acquaintances, hoping to find a crack in her defenses. Yet Isla remained steadfast. Her silence was an unspoken decree. The past could not be undone, and healing would not come easily. The psychological toll was immense. Nathan's confidence, his very identity, began to erode. He felt like a ghost drifting through his own life, unseen and unheard. Anxiety gnawed at him constantly, a shadow darkening every moment. Even the staff seemed affected by the atmosphere. Conversations hushed when Nathan entered a room. Eyes avoided his gaze. Caught in the crossfire, they moved carefully, wary of igniting further tensions. One evening, as Nathan sat alone in the expansive living room, the city lights casting long, cold shadows across the floor, he finally confronted the true depth of his isolation. The silence around him was louder than any accusation, a daily reminder of what he had lost and the chasm he needed to cross. But amid the despair, a fragile ember of resolve flickered to life within him. Nathan realized that this punishment, as agonizing as it was, might be the crucible he needed. It was forcing him to confront not just Isla's pain, but his own, to look honestly at the man he had become and the wounds he had inflicted. Isla's silence was not cruelty, but a challenge. It demanded that Nathan endure the weight of his guilt and confront the emptiness left in the wake of his actions. In this quiet, oppressive space, subtle changes began to take root. Nathan's eyes lost some of their usual hardness, replaced by a growing introspection. He started to listen, truly listen, not to words, but to the powerful silence that carried the weight of all that was unsaid. For the first time, he began to understand that some punishments are not about inflicting suffering, but about awakening the soul. Slowly, Nathan's desperation gave way to patience. He stopped trying to force connection and instead allowed himself to sit with the silence to learn from it. It was a painful process, but it was also necessary. In those long, silent nights, memories came flooding back, moments of neglect, arrogance, and selfishness that had paved the way to this place. He recalled the faces of those he had hurt, the bridges he had burned, and the love he had taken for granted. This silent punishment was teaching him humility, a lesson he had resisted all his life. And in the depths of that humility, Nathan found the first glimmers of hope. He realized that redemption would not come from grand gestures or quick fixes, but from steady, consistent change. It would require more than words. It would require transformation. Isla's silence was a mirror, reflecting back the broken parts of himself he had hidden away. It was a call to face those parts with courage and to begin the hard work of healing. Days stretched on, each one a test of endurance and willpower. Nathan's emotions oscillated between despair and determination, doubt and resolve. But beneath it all, a quiet strength was growing. And somewhere, in the spaces between silence and sorrow, a new path was beginning to take shape. A path toward forgiveness, understanding, and perhaps one day, reconciliation. Weeks passed since the walls between Nathan and Isla grew cold with silence, and yet the invisible chasm only seemed to widen. Nathan Carter was no stranger to battles. In business and life, he was a master strategist, always calculating his next move with precision. But now, the stakes were higher than any boardroom negotiation, and the battlefield was his own fractured existence. At first, Isla's silent punishment felt like a personal rejection, painful but simple. But slowly, Nathan realized the truth was far more complex and insidious. The distance wasn't just emotional. It had begun seeping into every corner of his life, dismantling the carefully constructed empire he once commanded. It started subtly. Projects that Nathan had personally overseen with meticulous care began to falter inexplicably. Key meetings slipped through his fingers. Emails went unanswered. Trusted allies suddenly acted with hesitation, doubt creeping into their interactions. Nathan sensed the shift, but couldn't pinpoint the cause. It was as if a silent force was unraveling his influence, a shadow moving quietly behind the scenes, undermining his authority. Then the incidents escalated. Important contracts were delayed by mysterious miscommunications. Financial decisions were questioned without explanation. The momentum Nathan relied upon in his career was grinding to a halt. At first, he suspected rivals in the cutthroat corporate world were at play. But as he delved deeper, the evidence pointed closer to home. Isla's influence was no longer confined to the penthouse. She had begun to orchestrate a quiet campaign of sabotage, subtle but devastating. It was a slow, strategic dismantling, calculated moves designed to make Nathan falter, to undermine his confidence without drawing direct confrontation. She was attacking his life the way he had attacked her family, with precision, patience, and an unrelenting will. Nathan struggled to comprehend how Isla could wield such power while maintaining her silence at home. It was a paradox that both terrified and fascinated him. He recalled the many evenings he found her sitting calmly, seemingly detached, while his world crumbled around him. Her eyes held no malice, only a fierce determination, a quiet vow that she would not be broken, and that he would pay for the pain he had caused. Nathan began noticing the small signs of sabotage. A critical file, accidentally misplaced. An important phone call that never came. The sudden disappearance of a key player in a project without explanation. It was as if Isla had infiltrated his life in ways he hadn't imagined possible. His frustration grew, but so did his respect for her cunning. Unlike his own aggressive tactics, hers were subtle, psychological, emotional, almost surgical in their precision. Isla's quiet war was not about destroying Nathan's wealth or status outright. It was about dismantling the foundation of his confidence, eroding the certainty that had once made him invincible. The humiliation hit hardest where it was least expected, in boardrooms, in meetings, and in conversations with colleagues, who began to question Nathan's judgment. He found himself on the defensive more often than he wanted, forced to justify decisions that had once been accepted without question. At home, the silence remained. Isla continued to avoid direct confrontation, but Nathan knew the punishment was far from over. Every failure, every setback was a reminder that he was no longer in control. It was a lesson in humility. He had no choice but to learn. One evening, after a particularly crushing day, Nathan sat alone in his office, staring at a report that detailed yet another lost opportunity. He clenched his fists, rage and despair mingling inside him. He thought of Isla, her calm demeanor, her unyielding silence, and felt a pang of fear, not of her, but of what she represented, the consequences of his past, the price of his ambition. The slow dismantling of his life was a mirror held up to his soul. He realized that this was no random series of misfortunes. It was Isla's vengeance. Precise, calculated, and deeply personal. But unlike the destruction he had once wrought, her revenge was not about ruin. It was about awakening to make him feel the loss, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. To break down the walls he had built around himself. Nathan's mind raced with questions. How far would Isla go? Was this punishment ever going to end? And if it did, what would be left of the man he once was? In the quiet moments between chaos, Nathan found himself reflecting on the irony of it all. He had spent a lifetime building empires and tearing down rivals, yet here he was, undone by a silent war waged by a woman who never raised her voice. Isla's punishment was not only strategic, it was transformative. And as Nathan sat in the dim glow of his office light, he understood that he had reached a crossroads. He could continue fighting, trying to reclaim control by force. Or he could begin to listen, to learn, and to change. Choice was his. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The air in the penthouse was heavy, thick with tension and unspoken words. Nathan Carter paced the length of the sleek marble floor, his mind a storm of turmoil and regret. The man who once commanded boardrooms and dictated outcomes was now consumed by one desperate hope: to mend the fractured bond with Isla. It was late into the night when Nathan finally decided he could no longer endure the cold distance that had become their existence. The silent punishment, the strategic sabotage, the invisible walls between them, they had crushed him. But beneath the ruin, something deeper stirred. A yearning to make things right, to find a path back to the woman who had become the center of his world. He rehearsed his words endlessly, knowing that a simple apology wouldn't suffice. He needed to show Isla that he understood the depth of the pain he had caused, that he was willing to change, to fight for their future. Gathering his courage, Nathan approached Isla in the living room where she sat, poised and distant. The calm that had always unnerved him now, feeling like a barrier he desperately wanted to breach. "Isla," he began, voice low and tentative, "I need to talk to you." She looked up, eyes steady but unreadable. For a moment, he thought she might refuse, but then she nodded ever so slightly. Nathan took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I know I've hurt you, more than I ever realized. And I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry." Isla's gaze didn't waver, but there was no warmth, no softness. "Sorry doesn't bring him back, Nathan," she said quietly. The words struck him like a blow. He had expected resistance, but the finality in her voice was a reminder that some wounds ran too deep for words alone. "I know," he replied, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I can't undo the past, but I want to be different. I want to be better. For you. For us." Isla's expression remained guarded. "You want to change, but you can't erase what's already been done. You have to live with it. Every day." Nathan nodded, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. "I do, and I want to carry that burden if it means I can make amends." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the city outside. Isla's voice softened just slightly, the edge of her pain breaking through. "You can't bring my father back, Nathan, no matter how much you regret it. You can't fix the past." "No," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But I want to build a future, one that honors him. One where I'm accountable, and I don't let ambition blind me again." Isla studied him, her eyes searching for sincerity, for the man she once thought she knew. "Promises are easy to make," she said, "but harder to keep. I need to see it, not just hear it." Nathan swallowed hard, knowing she was right. Words without action were empty. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes," he said earnestly. She stood, the distance between them seeming to shrink by the smallest fraction. "I don't want to be your enemy, Nathan," she said. "But you have to. Understand, this pain you caused doesn't disappear because you say sorry." He took a step forward, the vulnerability in his eyes raw and real. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. Just a chance to show you I can be better, that I can be worthy." Isla's expression softened for a fleeting moment, and Nathan dared to hope. "But this is just the beginning," she warned. "You have a long way to go." Nathan nodded, a fierce determination kindling inside him. "I know." Over the next few days, Nathan threw himself into the work of making amends. He reached out to the families affected by his past decisions, visiting those who had suffered losses and offering apologies, not as a show of charity, but as a genuine effort to acknowledge their pain. He launched initiatives to support struggling entrepreneurs, creating funds and programs designed to rebuild what had been broken by ruthless corporate takeovers, many of which he had once led. Isla watched his efforts quietly, skeptical but unwilling to dismiss the sincerity behind his actions. Their interactions remained cautious and measured, but beneath the surface, a fragile thread of trust began to weave its way through the silence. Nathan's commitment was tested repeatedly. Old habits and doubts crept in, moments where the weight of guilt and the temptation to retreat into familiar defenses threatened to undo his progress. But each time, he reminded himself of the stakes, the chance to rebuild not just his reputation, but a life with Isla. Their conversations grew deeper, more honest. Nathan shared his fears and regrets openly, no longer hiding behind pride or bravado. Isla, in turn, began to reveal pieces of her own pain, the scars left by years of loss and betrayal. One evening, as they sat together watching the city lights flicker, Isla reached for Nathan's hand, a small but powerful gesture that spoke volumes. I don't know what the future holds, she said softly, but I want to see where this goes. Nathan squeezed her hand gently, the promise of new beginnings shimmering between them. In that moment, the silence that had once divided them began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile hope and the possibility of healing. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt ready to walk it, not alone, but hand in hand with Isla. The years of silent battles and unspoken wounds had culminated in a moment neither Nathan nor Isla could have predicted. What had started as a punishment steeped in silence and subtle sabotage had morphed into something far more profound, an emotional crusade that pierced deeper than any legal contract or boardroom deal. Isla's vengeance was no longer about external victories or public humiliations. It was about dismantling Nathan's inner fortress, unraveling the man he had spent his life crafting. The mission was personal, surgical, aimed at striking not his wealth or status, but his very soul. For Isla, the pain was unbearable and palpable. Every calculated move she made was fueled by heartbreak, betrayal, and the profound loss of her father. A loss made worse by the fact that Nathan's ruthless ambition had been the cause. She was determined that he would not escape unscathed. Isla's approach was slow, deliberate, and precise. She wasn't looking for a quick collapse. She wanted Nathan to experience the slow drip of loss and regret, each drop eroding his confidence and shaking the foundations of his identity. At first, Nathan dismissed the signs, attributing setbacks to external forces or sheer bad luck. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. Projects he championed faltered inexplicably. Trusted colleagues grew distant, questioning decisions they once supported without hesitation. Important meetings were delayed, communications missed, or misunderstood. His empire, once solid and unshakable, began to show cracks. What cut deeper than these professional blows was Isla's presence, or rather, her absence. She moved through their shared spaces like a ghost, her touch light but empty, her smiles rare and fleeting. When they spoke, her words were measured, her tone distant. At social gatherings, Isla was warm and engaging with others, but to Nathan, she was a cold stranger. The disconnect was a silent wound that refused to heal. He felt constantly scrutinized, judged not for his successes, but for his failures, both past and present. Isla's revenge was not loud or chaotic. It was quiet, persistent, and all-consuming. Nathan's confidence, once his greatest asset, began to crumble. The certainty with which he had navigated life was replaced by hesitation and self-doubt. He found himself replaying every conversation, every decision, wondering where he had gone wrong, what he could have done differently. But the emotional blows didn't stop there. Isla withheld affection and support, denying Nathan the warmth and connection he desperately craved. She refused to offer praise or encouragement, leaving him adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Each day was a challenge to maintain his composure, to hold on to the fragments of pride that remained. Despite the emotional distance, Nathan was drawn to Isla's pain. He saw in her eyes a storm of sorrow and anger, a mirror reflecting the damage his ambition had wrought. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, marked by public criticism and private humiliation, Nathan returned home drained and defeated. Isla met him at the door, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she handed him a sealed envelope, a letter she had written, her words carefully chosen and deeply felt. Nathan retreated to the solitude of his office to read. The letter was a raw confession of grief and loss, a litany of years filled with shattered dreams and stolen moments. Isla wrote of the man her father had been, honorable, kind, a pillar of strength who had been broken by the ruthless tactics Nathan had employed. She described the unbearable burden of watching her family crumble, the despair that led her father to take his own life. But what struck Nathan most profoundly was the final revelation. Isla confessed that she had been pregnant when her father died, a child lost to the overwhelming stress and sorrow of the moment. This secret, held close for years, shattered Nathan's heart. He wept for the life he had never known, for the pain he had caused, and for the woman who had borne this burden alone. Isla watched him, her own tears silent but real. The letter was more than a message of grief. It was a bridge, an offering of vulnerability that cracked open the walls she had so fiercely defended. Nathan reached out, trembling, and took Isla's hand. "I never knew," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." For the first time in their tortured history, Isla's cold facade softened. "I don't want revenge anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want healing." Nathan nodded, hope blossoming where despair had once ruled. Their emotional battle had reached its peak, and from the ashes of pain, a fragile possibility of forgiveness and love began to emerge. But the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with difficulty. Both knew that wounds this deep could not be healed overnight. Yet, in that moment, a new chapter began, one where two broken souls dared to dream of redemption. The fragile truce between Nathan and Isla shimmered like glass, beautiful, yet easily shattered. They had begun to rebuild what was broken, cautiously stepping toward each other through the ruins of the past. But beneath this tentative peace, heavy secrets still simmered, threatening to disrupt their fragile new world. Nathan was no longer the man who wielded power without regard. He had been humbled by loss, stripped of his arrogance by Isla's silent vengeance, and now tried desperately to make amends. He was committed to change, to proving himself worthy of Isla's trust once again. And Isla, for her part, had started lowering her walls, allowing herself to hope for something better. But some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, demand to be told. One stormy evening, with rain tapping rhythmically against the windows of their penthouse, Isla summoned the courage to share a truth she had kept hidden for years. It was a secret not just about loss, but about a life never given the chance to bloom. Nathan sat by the crackling fireplace, its warmth offering a fragile comfort against the chill that had settled between them. He was learning patience and presence, qualities he'd lacked before, and now awaited whatever Isla was about to reveal. Her voice was steady, but tinged with vulnerability, a rare glimpse behind the mask she'd worn for so long. "There's something I've never told you," she began, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Nathan's heart pounded. He reached for her hand, silently urging her to continue. Isla swallowed hard, gathering her strength. "When my father died," she said softly, "I was pregnant." The words hung in the air like a sudden, sharp crack, fragile yet shattering. Nathan's breath caught. The revelation pierced through the tentative calm they had built, threatening to unravel everything. Isla's gaze met his, searching for understanding, for acceptance. "But," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I lost the baby. The doctors said the miscarriage was caused by the stress, the grief, everything we were going through." Nathan felt the room tilt. The weight of her confession sank deep into his bones. Tears welled in Isla's eyes. "I never told you because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Nathan asked gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Afraid you'd see me as fragile, broken, that you'd think less of me." Nathan shook his head vehemently. "Isla, none of that is true. You're the strongest person I know." Her lips trembled as she exhaled. "But it feels like I failed. Failed my child, failed my father, failed myself." Nathan's heart ached at her pain. "You didn't fail anyone. None of this is your fault." They sat in silence, the fire casting dancing shadows on their faces. For years, Isla had borne this secret alone, a hidden wound that shaped every tear, every act of vengeance, every sleepless night. Nathan thought of the immense loneliness, she must have endured, grieving a child she never had a chance to hold, all while navigating the chaos that followed her father's death. He realized the second secret explained so much more than he had ever imagined. The depth of Isla's pain, the fierce intensity of her need for justice, the silent rage beneath, her quiet composure. This revelation was a fulcrum, a painful turning point that could either drive them apart or bring them closer. Nathan reached out, his hand trembling as it clasped hers. "I wish I had been there for you. I wish I could have shared that pain." "You weren't," Isla whispered, "and that's the hardest truth." Her words struck him with the weight of regret. "I've spent so long blaming you," she admitted, "but maybe I was also punishing myself for losing that part of me I never got to know." Nathan nodded, tears threatening to spill. "We can't change the past, but maybe we can face the future together." For the first time, Isla allowed herself to hope. Hope that her grief wouldn't forever isolate her, that Nathan's remorse was real, and that healing might one day be possible. As the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, they embraced, not as enemies, but as two broken souls willing to try again. In the days that followed, the revelation of Isla's pregnancy loss became a silent thread weaving through their conversations and moments of quiet. It reframed their story, from one solely about betrayal and vengeance to one about shared pain and the possibility of redemption. Nathan found himself thinking often about the child they never had, the life cut short before it could begin. It was a symbol of loss too profound for words, and yet it became a shared burden, a place where their grief intersected. Isla, too, felt the weight of her secret lighten, as she no longer had to carry it alone. Nathan's presence, though imperfect and faltering, became a source of comfort rather than fear. Together, they began to speak more openly about their past, not just the events that brought them pain, but the emotions that had shaped their responses. It was difficult, sometimes painful, but necessary. Nathan acknowledged his mistakes, not just in grand gestures, but in everyday actions. Listening when Isla spoke, recognizing the small ways he could support her healing, and accepting that some wounds took time to mend. Isla, in turn, began to soften, her walls cracking to reveal glimpses of the woman beneath the armor, vulnerable, hopeful, and yearning for peace. One afternoon, Nathan surprised Isla with a small garden planted on the penthouse balcony, a symbol of life and renewal. Chose flowers known for resilience and healing, lavender for calm, daisies for innocence, and forget-me-nots for remembrance. As Isla touched the delicate petals, tears sprang to her eyes. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they were on, from destruction to healing, from loss to hope. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this and for not giving up on me." Nathan smiled, the heaviness in his chest lifting just a little. "We still have a long way to go," he said softly, "but maybe, together, we can build something new." Isla nodded, the first genuine smile in weeks breaking across her face. The second secret did not erase the past, nor did it instantly heal the wounds, but it forged a new path, one where understanding replaced blame, and shared grief became a foundation for rebuilding. Nathan and Isla knew the road ahead would be challenging. The scars of loss and betrayal did not vanish overnight, but with honesty, patience, and a willingness to face pain together, they began to glimpse a future where love could grow anew. In the quiet moments, a touch, a shared glance, a whispered word, they found the strength to keep moving forward. Their story was far from over, but for the first time, it was one not only of pain and revenge, but of hope, healing, and the fragile power of forgiveness. After the weight of truth had been laid bare, the betrayals, the lost child, the wounds too deep to easily heal, Nathan Carter found himself standing at a crossroads unlike any before. The path he had once walked, paved with ambition and ruthless decisions, had led him here, to a place of raw vulnerability and the urgent need for change. Redemption was no longer an abstract idea or a distant hope. It had become a necessity, a mission to reclaim not just Isla's trust, but the very essence of his own humanity. But Nathan knew that words alone would not suffice. He understood that true redemption required action, consistent, humble, and sincere action. The first steps were quiet and often unseen. Nathan began with the simplest acts: a coffee made just the way Isla liked it, a note left on the kitchen table, a flower placed carefully by her bedside. These small gestures were his way of saying, without words, that he saw her, that he cared, that he was present. He knew these moments wouldn't erase years of pain, but they were the fragile threads from which new trust could be woven. Isla noticed at first. She met these efforts with guarded skepticism, a protective instinct born of years of disappointment. But gradually she began to accept them. The warmth behind the gesture breaking through the chill of their fractured relationship. Nathan recognized that rebuilding their life required more than occasional kindness. It demanded a transformation of routine, a reshaping of priorities and values. He started waking earlier, dedicating time to reflection and prayer, something he had long neglected in his pursuit of success. He made a conscious effort to listen more and speak less, allowing Isla's feelings and needs to guide their conversations. He reached out to friends and mentors, seeking wisdom and support to navigate this new path. Most importantly, Nathan committed himself to consistency, knowing that trust was rebuilt not in grand declarations, but in daily, reliable actions. Nathan's redemption journey extended beyond the walls of their home. He understood that many others had suffered because of his past decisions, families whose businesses he had crushed, lives disrupted by his relentless ambition. One by one, he began visiting these families, not with empty apologies, but with tangible offers of help. He established funds to support small entrepreneurs, helping them rebuild what had been lost. He volunteered his time and resources to community projects, dedicating himself to making amends through service. Each visit was a step toward healing the wounds he had inflicted, a bridge built through humility and generosity. Isla observed these efforts quietly, a mixture of skepticism and admiration in her eyes. For the first time, she saw the man she once resented becoming someone who could truly change. Back home, the atmosphere between Nathan and Isla began to soften. The heavy silence that had dominated their interactions gave way to small conversations, tentative, sometimes awkward, but genuine. Isla allowed herself to share fragments of her past pain, while Nathan responded with empathy and patience. They rediscovered shared interests, moments of laughter, and even hope. The contract that had once bound them in bitterness now felt less like a prison and more like an opportunity. One cold evening, Nathan brought Isla a cup of warm tea as she sat quietly by the window. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of all the changes Nathan had embraced. They talked for hours, not about business or past grievances, but about dreams, fears, and the fragile possibility of a future together. Isla admitted she was beginning to believe that change was possible, that healing could happen. Nathan promised to keep walking this path with her, no matter how long it took. It was a moment of breakthrough, a glimmer of hope that their fractured love might be mended. The beginning of redemption was not about sweeping gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the slow, steady work of rebuilding trust and love through action, vulnerability, and unwavering commitment. Nathan and Isla's journey was far from over, but they had taken the crucial first steps together, and in those steps lay the promise of a new beginning. The city outside was wrapped in a cold winter night, the distant hum of traffic and the glow of street lights casting a pale light across the glass walls of the penthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter, heavy with tension and the lingering shadows of past hurts. But tonight, something different was stirring, a delicate shift in the balance of their fractured relationship. Nathan carefully carried a small tray across the room. On it rested a steaming cup of chamomile tea, known for its calming properties, and beside it, a single white lily delicately placed in a slender glass vase. The simplicity of the gesture was intentional, a silent offering of peace and renewal amidst the chaos that had engulfed them for months. He approached Isla, who sat near the expansive window, her figure outlined against the shimmering cityscape. She looked fragile yet composed, her eyes distant but attentive. Nathan's voice was gentle as he set the tray down. "I thought you might like this." Isla turned her gaze toward him, surprise flickering across her face, quickly replaced by something softer, a quiet acceptance. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. They shared a brief moment of silence, the kind that's heavy with meaning, where words are not needed but deeply felt. Nathan pulled a chair beside her, settling down with careful calm. "Isla, I won't pretend I'm perfect," he began, "or that I can undo everything I've done wrong. But I want you to know that I'm here, not just physically, but truly here. I'm committed to changing, for you, for us." Her eyes searched his, measuring the sincerity in his words. For months, the coldness between them had been impenetrable, but now she sensed a flicker of something genuine. "I see you trying," she said slowly, "and maybe for the first time, I believe you." Nathan's heart quickened. Those words, fragile as they were, felt like the first step toward something new. They began to talk, first cautiously, then more openly. Nathan spoke about the years he had spent chasing power and success, and how he'd lost sight of what truly mattered. He confessed his regrets, not as excuses, but as honest reflections on the man he once was. Isla shared her own story, the pain of losing her father, the heavy secret of the child she had lost, and the anger that had fueled her need for revenge. There, words wove a tapestry of shared vulnerability, creating a fragile connection that had seemed impossible before. As the night deepened, the conversation turned toward the future. Nathan described his vision, a life where they could be partners, equals, building something meaningful together. Not a life ruled by contracts and bitterness, but by respect, understanding, and love. Isla admitted her fears of being hurt again, of hope turning to disappointment, and the difficulty of trusting someone who had once caused so much pain. Yet amidst those fears, a quiet hope began to emerge. They spoke about change, how challenging it was, how slow and painful, but how necessary. Nathan promised to be patient, to listen, and to show his commitment through actions, not just words. Isla agreed to try, not to forget the past, but to learn to live beyond it, to allow herself to be vulnerable once more. Throughout their conversation, small moments of tenderness surfaced, a touch of the hand, a shared smile, a lingering look. Each one chipped away at the walls they had built around their hearts. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent, yet beautiful. Inside, two souls bruised by pain began to find a way toward healing. That night marked a turning point, not an end, but a new beginning. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with challenges and setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, Nathan and Isla dared to hope. They dared to believe that love, once broken, could be rebuilt. And in that fragile hope lay the promise of redemption. The days that followed the turning point between Nathan and Isla were marked by a subtle but profound transformation. It was a quiet revolution, unfolding not in grand gestures or loud declarations, but in the small, almost imperceptible moments where hearts began to soften and walls slowly crumbled. They moved cautiously, aware of the fragility of what they were trying to rebuild. The contract that once bound them in bitterness and obligation was still there, but its grip loosened with every shared smile, every tentative touch, every moment of genuine connection. Isla found herself noticing the little things Nathan did, things he had never done before. The way he left a cup of coffee waiting for her in the morning, just the way she liked it. The way he remembered the smallest details of her day, asking about them with sincere interest. The way he paused in the middle of a busy day to send her a message simply saying, "Thinking of you." These acts, though seemingly insignificant, carried weight far beyond their simplicity. They were signs that Nathan was present, that he cared, that he was willing to invest in the slow and steady work of healing. Isla responded in kind, allowing herself to offer small tokens of affection, a folded note in his briefcase, a favorite song played quietly in the background, a lingering look across the room. Together, these small exchanges formed the foundation of a new kind of intimacy, one built not on passion or drama, but on trust, respect, and understanding. For months, silence had ruled their home like an invisible barrier. Words were weapons or withheld shields. Conversations were cautious and guarded. But now, conversation began to flow again. It started with brief exchanges. "How was your day? Did you eat?" And gradually grew into deeper discussions about hopes, fears, and dreams. Isla shared memories of her childhood, stories about her father that Nathan had never heard. Nathan spoke of his own regrets and the lessons he was learning. They talked about the future, not as a contract, but as a possibility. These conversations were often awkward, sometimes painful, but always honest. And with each one, the distance between them shrank a little more. Not every moment needed to be filled with words. Sometimes, the greatest comfort came from simply being together in silence. They found peace in shared spaces, reading side by side, cooking meals together, walking through the city hand in hand. These quiet moments, free from expectations or demands, allowed them to reconnect on a deeper level. Isla began to see Nathan not just as the man who had hurt her, but as a person striving to change. Nathan saw in Isla a resilience and grace that inspired him every day. One of the most profound shifts was Isla's gradual willingness to lower her defenses. She began to let Nathan see her pain, her doubts, and her fears, not as weapons or barriers, but as parts of herself worthy of love. This vulnerability was terrifying, yet liberating. For Nathan, it was a privilege to witness the woman behind the guarded exterior. He responded with patience, kindness, and unwavering support. Together, they created a safe space where healing could begin. The contract that once defined their relationship was no longer a cage, but a backdrop to a story that was being rewritten. Isla and Nathan were becoming partners, not adversaries. Their interactions grew warmer, their respect deeper. Where once there had been coldness, now there was cautious hope. They were learning to trust again, not just each other, but themselves. Though progress was slow and often uncertain, both knew that the silent new beginning was the most important step. It was proof that even the deepest wounds could start to heal. It was a promise that love, when nurtured with patience and truth, could rise from the ashes. Isla and Nathan faced the future with tentative hearts but determined spirits. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they were ready to face it together. Lucas had always been a man who lived behind the towering walls of his corporate empire, a world where power was measured by profit margins and dominance over competitors. But after the storm that had shattered his private life, the pain, the betrayal, and the deep loss he had caused, those walls no longer offered shelter. Instead, they felt like barriers keeping him isolated from the very humanity he was desperate to reclaim. He knew that if he wanted to make real amends, it had to go beyond the quiet gestures in his penthouse or the fragile peace with Chloe. The damage he had inflicted extended far beyond his personal circle families who had lost their livelihoods. Communities broken by ruthless business decisions, and countless individuals whose dreams had been crushed under his relentless ambition. Redemption, Lucas realized, was not just about winning Chloe's forgiveness. It was about facing the consequences of his past with humility and purpose. He began by visiting the families his company had destroyed, reaching out personally to those he had once overlooked. The first visit was perhaps the hardest. He stepped into a modest home where a small family had struggled to keep afloat after their business collapsed. The mother greeted him warily, her eyes filled with pain and suspicion. For a long moment, Lucas stood silent, the weight of his responsibility pressing heavily upon him. "I know words can't fix what I've done," he said softly, "but I want to listen. I want to understand." That moment of vulnerability opened the door to a conversation filled with tears, anger, and fragile hope. Lucas listened as they recounted their struggles, their shattered dreams, and their lingering fear of the future. And in that listening, something began to shift within him. Determined to do more than just apologize, Lucas created a fund dedicated to helping entrepreneurs rebuild their dreams, offering loans, mentorship, and resources to those who had been pushed to the brink. It was a gesture that spoke louder than any press release, a tangible commitment to righting the wrongs he had been part of. Word of his efforts spread slowly, met at first with skepticism by the public and media. But Lucas understood that trust had to be earned over time. He remained consistent, visiting communities, speaking at events, and sharing his journey honestly, not as a savior, but as a man seeking to heal wounds he once ignored. Chloe watched these efforts quietly. The cold fire of her initial vengeance had given way to a complex mixture of respect and cautious optimism. She saw the way Lucas' eyes now held a gentleness, how his posture softened when speaking with those he helped. It was the Lucas she had once hoped to reach, the man capable of empathy beneath the armor of ambition. One afternoon, as they shared a rare moment of peace, she said, "I see you trying, Lucas, not just for me, but for everyone you hurt." He nodded, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. "I have to be better. For you, for the people I wronged, and for myself." The transformation was not instantaneous, nor was it easy. Lucas faced setbacks, old habits tugging at him, moments of doubt, and the skepticism of those who refused to believe in his change. But he persisted. His public acts of redemption were matched by a deeper, quieter transformation within. He began to prioritize integrity over profit, compassion over conquest. Slowly, the empire he built began to reflect the man he was becoming, not just a titan of industry, but a steward of hope. Through these efforts, a new chapter unfolded in Lucas and Chloe's story, one not defined by past pain, but by the possibility of healing, forgiveness, and a shared future. The 6-month mark since the signing of their contract was fast approaching, and with it, a whirlwind of emotions neither Lucas nor Chloe had anticipated. What had begun as a cold, calculated arrangement, driven by vengeance and obligation, was now evolving into something fragile and real, something that dared to whisper promises of hope and healing. The past months had been a crucible, forging new understanding and breaking down walls that had seemed impenetrable. Lucas sat in the quiet of the living room, a soft hum of the city's evening life drifting through the open window. The room, once filled with tension and silence, now held a warmth that reflected the subtle changes between them. He glanced at the calendar on his phone. In just a few days, the contract would expire. What would come after was unknown territory. But for the first time in a long while, Lucas wasn't afraid of the future. Instead, he was filled with cautious optimism. Chloe was unlike anyone he had ever met. She had challenged him in ways he never imagined, not just intellectually or strategically, but emotionally. She had peeled away layers of his pride and arrogance, forcing him to confront the man he had been and decide who he wanted to become. And in the process, he had come to admire her strength, her resilience, and the quiet grace with which she bore her scars. Their interactions, which once resembled a battlefield, had softened into shared moments of genuine connection. There were no longer schemes or calculated moves, but honest conversations and tentative gestures of care. Lucas had learned to listen, not just to Chloe's words, but to the emotions behind them. And Chloe had begun to see past the man who had wronged her to glimpse the person striving to make amends. On the evening of their planned dinner, Lucas prepared the apartment with meticulous care. The dining table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, candles flickering softly to cast a gentle glow. A bouquet of white lily and purple orchids adorned the center, a subtle nod to purity and strength, symbols of the delicate but powerful bond they were beginning to nurture. When Chloe arrived, she was dressed simply but elegantly, her usual guarded expression softened by curiosity. She stepped inside, taking in the transformed space, the warmth that contrasted starkly with the coldness that had once permeated their home. Lucas greeted her with a sincere smile, holding the door open as she entered. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Chloe nodded, allowing herself a small smile in return. As they sat down to eat, the initial awkwardness melted away under the gentle flow of conversation. They spoke of everything and nothing, their favorite books, the music that soothed their souls, and the dreams they had once held before life's harsh realities intervened. The meal became a bridge, connecting two hearts that had long been estranged. Lucas shared stories from his journey of redemption, the people he had met in the communities he had vowed to support, the lessons learned from listening to those he had once overlooked. He spoke not with pride, but with humility, revealing the man he was becoming. Chloe listened intently, the respect in her eyes deepening. She saw in Lucas a sincerity that had been absent before, a commitment to change that was no longer just words, but visible in his actions. Between courses, Lucas reached across the table, taking Chloe's hand in his. The touch was warm and steady, a silent promise. "Chloe," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "these past months have been the hardest of my life. I've faced the consequences of my mistakes, and every day I'm reminded of the pain I caused. But through it all, I've realized that I don't want to just make amends. I want to build something new, something real with you, not because of the contract, but because I believe in us." Chloe's breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the steady beat of his pulse, the genuine hope shining in his eyes. "I never thought I'd say this," she replied softly, "but I want to try too. Not as a game or obligation, but because I want to see where this could go, together, as equals." A quiet joy blossomed in Lucas' chest. Years of pain and mistrust seemed to dissolve in that moment. They rose from the table and moved closer, the space between them charged with unspoken words and newfound possibilities. Their embrace was tentative, but filled with promise, silent acknowledgement that what had started in bitterness was now blossoming into love. The days that followed were filled with discovery and growth. They learned to navigate the delicate dance of rebuilding trust, balancing vulnerability with strength. Conversations deepened, laughter returned, and they began to envision a future where they could stand side by side, not as adversaries, but as partners. Lucas found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing fears and hopes that he had long buried. Chloe, in turn, revealed parts of herself she had kept hidden, allowing him to see the woman beneath the armor of vengeance. Together, they faced challenges, the ghosts of the past, moments of doubt, and the lingering scars that time could not erase overnight. But they faced these challenges as a team, supporting and encouraging each other. The contract, once a symbol of control and retribution, had become irrelevant, a mere footnote in the story of their transformation. What remained was a relationship forged in fire and tempered with grace. Their love was not perfect, but it was real. And in that reality, they found hope. The crisp morning light filtered gently through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns across the bedroom where Lucas and Chloe had slowly begun to build a new life. One born not from contracts or revenge, but from the fragile roots of love and forgiveness. After months of pain, betrayal, and painstaking healing, a new chapter was unfolding, quietly yet profoundly. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting lightly on her abdomen, a secret that had blossomed quietly within her. She was pregnant. The news had come unexpectedly, stirring a mix of emotions: hope, fear, joy, and a daunting sense of responsibility. For Chloe, this new life was a symbol of possibility, a chance to break the cycle of pain that had defined her past and Lucas's. When she told Lucas, his reaction was a tapestry of raw, unguarded emotion. The man who had once been so focused on power and control now stood before her with wide, vulnerable eyes, a mixture of awe and overwhelming love washing over him. "This changes everything," Lucas whispered, voice thick with feeling. Chloe nodded, tears brimming, yet a smile touching her lips. "It does. But it's a beginning, not just for the baby, but for us." That moment marked a profound shift. The future they had once feared now held a new promise. The tiny life growing inside Chloe was a beacon, illuminating the path toward healing and unity. With the news of the pregnancy came a surge of determination in Lucas. He wanted to show Chloe that his commitment to their relationship was no longer confined to words or small gestures. He wanted to make a declaration, a promise that would mark the true beginning of their partnership. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, Lucas led Chloe to the rooftop of their building, a place where the city stretched out beneath them like a sea of lights and endless possibilities. He had arranged a simple yet intimate setting: soft blankets, glowing lanterns, and the gentle hum of the city night. As they settled into the quiet embrace of the evening, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Chloe's breath caught, a mixture of surprise and anticipation flooding her senses. "Kyle," Lucas began, using the name she had come to prefer among close friends, "these months have changed me in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to love and be loved in return, not through power or control, but through trust and respect." He opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant, understated, a symbol not of possession, but of partnership. "I want to marry you again," he said, voice steady, but filled with emotion. "This time for love, for us, for our future." Eyes shimmered with tears as she nodded, words catching in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's begin again, truly." The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, joyful energy. They planned their wedding not as a grand spectacle, but as an intimate ceremony that reflected the authenticity of their journey. Friends and family who had witnessed their struggles gathered to celebrate the transformation, a testament to the power of forgiveness and second chances. The ceremony took place in a small chapel surrounded by blooming gardens, the air fragrant with the scent of jasmine and roses. Chloe walked down the aisle, wearing a simple yet elegant dress, her hand resting lightly on her growing belly. Lucas waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving her, filled with pride and love. Their vows were spoken from the heart, promises to honor, support, and cherish one another through all the days to come. As they exchanged rings, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm golden light over the scene, a sign, many said, of blessings and new beginnings. Married again, but this time by choice and love rather than obligation. Lucas and Chloe embraced the challenges and joys that came with starting a family. They attended prenatal appointments together, planning for the arrival of their child with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Their home, once a place of tension and coldness, was transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and hope. They painted the nursery soft shades of blue and green, symbols of tranquility and growth, and filled it with books, toys, and promises of endless love. Lucas, who had once measured success by business conquests, now found his greatest joy in the simple acts of caring, reading bedtime stories, preparing meals, and learning to be present. Chloe, too, flourished in this new chapter, her strength tempered by the softness of impending motherhood. Together, they navigated the ups and downs of pregnancy, supporting one another with patience and grace. One evening, as they sat together watching the city skyline from their balcony, Chloe leaned into Lucas, her hand resting on his. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," she said softly. Lucas nodded, his eyes reflecting the city lights and the depth of his gratitude. "We were broken in so many ways," he replied, "but we found our way back, not because it was easy, but because we were willing to fight for it, for each other." They sat in comfortable silence, the future stretching before them like an open book, uncertain but filled with promise. As the months passed and Chloe's belly grew round with life, the old wounds continued to heal, replaced by hope and renewed purpose. Their love, once forged in pain and vengeance, had transformed into a partnership grounded in respect, understanding, and shared dreams. The arrival of their child would mark not just the beginning of a new family, but the birth of a new life for both of them, one defined by forgiveness, redemption, and the enduring power of love. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the horizon, painting the sky with shades of deep amber and soft violet as Lucas and Chloe stood side by side on the terrace overlooking the city. The vast skyline shimmered beneath them, a testament to the countless stories woven into its streets, stories of ambition, struggle, heartbreak, and hope. Their story, too, had become one of those countless threads, a tale marked by pain but ultimately defined by transformation. For years, their relationship had been nothing more than a game, a wager of wills, a calculated battle fought beneath the guise of a marriage contract. But now, as the twilight wrapped around them, those early days of cold strategy felt like a distant shadow, eclipsed by something far more profound and real. Lucas turned to Chloe, his eyes reflecting the weight of everything they had endured. "You know," he said quietly, "when this all started, I never imagined it would lead us here, from a bet to a life I want to build with you." Chloe smiled softly, the expression lighting her face with a quiet strength. "Neither did I," she replied. "I thought this was just a game of revenge and control, but it became so much more. It became a journey of redemption for both of us." Their journey had been long and arduous. It was paved with mistakes, misunderstandings, and moments when the past threatened to consume them. But it was also illuminated by the fierce light of forgiveness, the steady flame of patience, and the unyielding courage to change. Lucas remembered the man he once was, ruthless, driven by power, blind to the consequences of his actions. He also remembered the turning point, the moment when pain became the fuel for growth, when guilt transformed into purpose. Chloe, too, reflected on her path. The anger that had once consumed her was replaced by a deeper understanding that vengeance only chained her to the past, while forgiveness set her free. Together, they had rewritten their story, shifting from adversaries locked in conflict to partners walking side by side. Their marriage was no longer a symbol of obligation or strategy. It was a living testament to the power of healing and grace. They had learned that love is not a fleeting feeling or a perfect state. It is a choice made every day, through every struggle and triumph, that love is showing up even when it's hard, speaking truth with kindness, and holding space for the other's pain and growth. It is embracing imperfection, both in ourselves and in those we care for. And most importantly, love is rooted in respect, the foundation upon which lasting relationships are built. As they stood watching the sun's final rays disappear, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace. The man he was becoming was not defined by wealth or status, but by the capacity to love and be loved authentically. Chloe reached out and took his hand, a silent promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story, born of a bet, tempered by pain, and reborn through forgiveness, was a beacon of hope. It was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that brokenness could give way to wholeness, and that love, when nurtured with truth and courage, could transform lives. Their journey holds a lesson for all of us. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes we find ourselves caught in circumstances beyond our control. Pain, betrayal, loss. But those moments do not have to define us. We have the power to choose our response. We can let bitterness fester, or we can choose forgiveness. We can cling to old wounds, or we can open ourselves to healing. We can live in fear, or we can embrace hope. Lucas and Chloe's story reminds us that redemption is always possible, that no matter how broken we feel, no matter how far we've fallen, we can rise again. And that the greatest love stories often begin not with ease or perfection, but with the courage to change, to forgive, and to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. As the night settled around them, Lucas and Chloe stepped back inside their home, a home no longer built on contracts or revenge, but on trust, respect, and a love forged through fire. Their story was no longer about a bet won or lost. It was about the enduring power of the human heart to heal, grow, and love beyond all odds. If this story moved your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe now and join a community where love, hope, and second chances come alive with every story. And if someone needs to hear this, share it. You never know how much one story can change a life.